Hello and welcome to the second video on the building of this Ben Buckle Falcon vintage RC kit. This model is actually adapted from a much earlier design going all the way back to 1936 when it went by the name of the Cloud Cruiser. Now, during the process of transcribing the plans from one kit to another, it has actually undergone a number of slight modifications and changes, and I've noticed those immediately on beginning to look closely at this component, the tailplane. Now, to take a look at that and see why the changes have come about, I'm going to alter the viewing angle so you can see it a little bit more clearly. Here we have the components laid out before us. The first thing is the material itself was very helpfully in this kit grouped together, so I didn't have to search through a bundle of strip balsa to find the parts intended for building this tailplane. Here you have the trailing edge and the stringers which make the upper and lower front spars. The ribs pre-cut out are the first thing that I noticed doesn't match the plan, and that's because the original model was intended as a free flight model powered by 10 to 15 cc diesel or petrol, which sort of ages the design of this model. And this spar and this spar were boxed in on either side by 16th balsa, which produced a nice strong girder design. But of course, in this radio assist model, that point will mark the beginning of the elevator. So these ribs will have to be cut through, and we'll have a forward section and a rear section, this part being the elevator itself. And that will require a slight modification, obviously, of the ribs. The end pieces are sort of roughly cut to size. They will require a little bit more fettling to get them accurate. But the other thing that I noticed is the quality of the balsa is actually very good. Sometimes it's rather disappointing when one's not selecting the balsa for a build, in that it can be far too heavy and dense. But this is really light but strong. It's straight grained. The strips themselves are straight, and these will have to be formed to take on the cross section of the actual ribs at this point. So the next stage will be to cut this balsa at the length, tidy up these end pieces and cut the trailing edge to shape, and then we'll commence with the gluing together, and I'll take you through my philosophy on how I'm going to approach that. As I mentioned in the last little section, these ribs were designed for the tail surface to be for free flight, so there was no need for a working elevator. So they do need some modification. This front portion actually makes up the tailplane, and this part at the back makes up the elevator. And the original design of two spars with a girder structure made up with 16th balsa either side isn't required. So I need to remove these, which I'm doing, and I'm going to actually write on the rear section for the elevator which one this is. So this is number 5, and I'll put that to one side so they're easy to identify later on. I anticipate that if I didn't do that, I'd end up getting them mixed up. So this one's number 5, and I need to remove this front section for the elevator or horizontal stabilizer part, and this will make up the working elevator. Now ready to start gluing these ribs that make up the tail surface into place, and what I'm going to use I'm going to use a thin super glue to put and lock them in position, and I find very helpful one of these applicator attachments that you can buy in packs of 100 off one of the normal internet servers, and it actually makes application of the CA glue much easier and more precise. I'm going to use this to tack, but I'm a little bit concerned. I think super glue's got a tendency to become rather brittle, so I'm going to back that up once they're locked into position with some wood glue along the joint. So it's important to get everything horizontal, and the aim is to get as much as possible glued down while it's pinned on the board, and then when it's all set, and that includes sheeting the leading edge as well in the centre section, when it's all ready it'll be lifted off the board, turned over, and the other side needs to be sheeted along with the stringer added. So the process starts with super glue applied to the ends and ensure that they're lined up accurately. If need be, you can always use some kicker, although I don't think it'll actually be needed here. So it's in position now. I don't need to worry about it moving, or it's not accurate, or the glue's taking too long to set and things have moved. That's why I like using it, but I do like to back it up with some wood glue after I've done this. So I'll just glue these in place. Ensuring that they're all standing vertically. Okay, it's all going well. It's always exciting to start a new project. And I know that many people have difficulty not starting the project but finishing them. And that's why I like to break it down into small components. So the tail service, the fin, the elevator, I treat that as one project in itself and don't worry about the final aircraft that's being built or whatever the model is. I focus on the thing I'm doing at the moment, and I find that is much better in terms of motivating myself to get the job done. So there you go, locked in position. I have noticed that a couple of these ribs are standing proud of this trailing edge of the elevator, and it will need to be sanded to even that up. This one's slightly lower, that one's slightly higher, but the whole thing's going to be sanded when it's lifted off the board. But at the moment I'm quite happy with that. I'll take it up to the halfway point and then we'll pause and I'll show you the next stage after I've applied some wood glue. I said to a friend recently that, having modelled from being about 11 years of age, 10 or 11 years of age, the biggest change I've noted, apart from, you know, the obvious electronics and so forth, has been developments in glues and adhesives. Back in the day, you were very much limited to what was available, and it wasn't always the best. The epoxy glue actually consisted of something that was made from horse bones, I believe, that my father used to get from the engineering works. The smell was horrendous. But adhesives and any sort of fixing, chemical fixing, has just come on leaps and bounds and speeded up dramatically the building process. I'm just going to pin this particular rib. Don't like to do this very often, but just to hold it in position, give it a tap. That's it. And this one has to be at a slight angle. And I've actually taken a little bit off here. I've tested it beforehand. We'll glue that in. I think I'm going to be going for the tail being secured with nylon bolts. So that will mean that the design will have to be slightly modified once again from the original intention of elastic bands through holes in the tail surface, which just doesn't appeal at all. That also will need a pin to hold that end down. That's okay. Now, a little bit of glue to each joint. It's very much a belt and braces approach, but I don't think it's going to do a lot of harm. Better this than you have a hard landing and the super glue cracks and gives way, because I do think it is a little brittle. It can be brittle. And certainly there's a bit more flexibility in this white glue that I'm using. This make happens to be Gorilla, which I found to be a really good adhesive. Okay, so I'll carry on with this, and when we come back I'll have done both sides and I'll add the upper stringer and the leading edge. Okay, well, as I hope you can see, I've actually glued the leading edge into position. And thinking about this, if I was to do it again, so for anybody out there, I would avoid using the ribs with the bird mouth openings that you glue this into. I just think it's really difficult to line them up accurately. I've done that, but I've had to fettle about and take a little bit out for the front edge to get that to work. I'd much rather have a straight, flat surface, glue the quarter on and then take in the sheeting over the top. But it's done now and it's already starting to feel a lot more secure. I have these stringers which are really little more than I would say guides for the sheeting, which will actually add the majority of the strength to this part of the wing, I believe. So the advantage of using CA is that I just get it dry fitted into position, and I've had to actually make sure that these would go in correctly to allow for the 1/16 sheet to lie over the top. And then once it's all lined up, which there is, all you need to do is wick this CA glue, which runs in quite effectively to the joint. Because it's so thin, capillary reaction draws it in to make the required adhesion. So it's actually quite a lightweight structure, which is probably because of its heritage as a free flight model. So that's that section done. I'll carry on and do the other section. The next time we'll come back, I'll actually be starting to do the sheeting itself on the surface before I take this structure off the board. I like to get as much done as possible in the flat state. That guarantees that you are avoiding warps. So until the next part, we'll just pause it there and I'll crack on. This is, of course, an occupational hazard. Sooty here, neighbour's cat who's moved in with us, often decides to climb onto the table and help out. I don't know how much help he is. He's a nuisance. Adorable one though. Having said that I was going to leave this pinned to the board as long as possible, I've actually done the opposite. I decided to take it off the board because I need to clean up this edge ready for the application and gluing on of the 16th leading edge, and it needs to be fed in. It's going to be feathered at the leading edge. I must admit I don't really normally like doing that, but that's the design, so I will stick with it. I think that the actual application of this 16 is going to add enormously to the strength, but I was actually quite surprised when I took this off because it's very rigid and there's not a lot of balsa in there, but it just seems to work. So once the leading edge and this centre section's covered, top and bottom, I think it's going to become extremely stiff, and that's exactly what you want on a controlled surface. I will actually locate the blocks for the hinges while I'm working on this, because obviously trying to fit them in afterwards is always a pain, and it will need sanding down. I have discovered that for some reason this rib here on both sides is higher than it needs to be. It's obviously just a fault in the transcribing of the plans. But the next stage is going to be marking this out, cutting. I might actually have to apply a little bit of steam to the leading edge to bend it a little bit to get it round here. We'll see. But I'll let you know how I get on with it and what I do. But that hasn't taken long at all. It's a big surface. As I think I've probably suggested, I've built model aeroplanes with smaller wingspans than this. So it's going to be a bit of a lump. So until the next instalment, I'll leave it there for now. Well, as you can see here, I've started to sheet the leading edge of the upper surface, and it's gone on quite easily. So what I thought I'd do is show you how I've actually gone about steaming this to get it to work. So the first thing to do is to wet the leading edge. The rest of it's fine because it doesn't have the severe bend on it across the front of the 1/4 inch scale. So you wet that all the way along, and then the trick is to actually apply some steam. So kettle on. It doesn't take long to boil this because I've already been doing it with the other sheeting. There we go. So I'm applying heat along the leading edge mainly. I'm not worried about the rest of it so much. I've only wet one side, so obviously the fibres on that side, you can see it's starting to curl up there. Flick that off, and then you simply put a little bit of a bend in it. You see it's forming there straight away. Hard to do this one-handed. So it's bending round there nicely. It's harder obviously where the wood is narrower, but I can feel it. There you go. So that's now curved and it'll go round the leading edge. So the top level is easy because you get access to the inside as well, but you can't with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a combination of glues. I'm using the Gorilla wood glue for the actual rib section itself, but when it comes to actually holding it in place, I'm going to use super glue. And that'll mean that I'll get an instant grip on the surface along this spar here, and that'll hold it all in place. And then the glue, the white glue, will go off over a short amount of time. But this will happen rapidly, therefore holding everything in place. So I'm applying super glue to the rear spar, and I'm also going to use it on the leading edge. after I've started to roll it round. So the trick is to get this in position accurately. So holding it on to the rear spar. And that's it on. And I've also got it on this root here. And then what I'll do is I'll turn it round and I'll bend it. Still quite soft because it's been steamed. It's still a bit wet on this side. I'm going to apply glue into here and work along, not all in one go because the glue will go off too rapidly. But if I do a piece like this to demonstrate, now if I roll that and hold it for a few seconds, the advantage of super glue obviously, that's going to hold. And then work along. And it's going to hold. There you go. It's holding, just inch along. And because I've applied heat and steam to this leading edge, it's taking quite easily to the shape. And one has to make sure you don't super glue yourself in the process. It's all too easy to do. But that's forming nicely. It's surprising. I have selected some of the softer 16th sheet because the softer obviously has wider grains, and that means it's more likely to bend easily. If you use quarter grain that you would use for ribs, for example, you're almost certainly going to split it, or you're more likely to split it anyway. But you can see there, working my way along, that that's taken, and when that's dry I'll be able to shave off the excess and it'll have a nice feathered in leading edge. Although, as I said earlier, I'm not normally keen on doing this. This has worked very well, and the PVA glue that's inside will go off on the ribs in about half an hour or so, an hour. There you go. Top and bottom, extremely strong wing. Well, wing, I'm saying a wing, it's only a tail, but it feels like one. So there you go.